Get you? Moody growled. His voice was low and gravelly. No, said Harry. He missed. Leave it! Moody shouted. Leave what? Harry said, bewildered. Not you, him. Moody growled, jerking his thumb over his shoulder at Crab, who had just frozen, about to pick up the white ferret. It seemed that Moody's rolling eye was magical and could see out of the back of his head. Moody started to limp toward Crab, Goyle, and the ferret, which gave a terrified squeak and took off, streaking toward the dungeons. I don't think so, roared Moody, pointing his wand at the ferret again. It flew 10 feet into the air, fell with a smack to the floor, and then bounced upwards once again. I don't like people who attack when their opponent's back's turned, growled Moody as the ferret bounced higher and higher, squealing in pain. Stinking, cowardly, scummy thing to do. The ferret flew through the air, its legs and tails flailing helplessly. Never do that again, said Moody, speaking the word as the ferret hit the stone floor and bounced upwards again and again. Professor Moody, said a shocked voice. Professor McGonagall was coming down the marble staircase with her arms full of books. Hello, Professor McGonagall, said Moody calmly, bouncing the ferret still higher. What are you doing? Said Professor McGonagall, her eyes following the bouncing ferret's progress through the air. Teaching, said Moody. Moody, is that a student? Shrieked Professor McGonagall, the books spilling out of her arms. Yep, said Moody. No, cried Professor McGonagall, running down the stairs and pulling out her wand. A moment later, with a loud snapping noise, Draco Malfoy had reappeared, lying in a heap on the floor, with his sleek blonde hair all over his now brilliantly pink face. He got to his feet, wincing. Moody, we never use transfiguration as a punishment, said Professor McGonagall. Surely Professor Dumbledore told you that? He might have mentioned it. Yeah, said Moody, scratching his chin unconcernedly. But I thought a good, sharp shock. We give detentions, Moody, or speak to the offender's house. I'll do that then, said Moody, staring at Malfoy with great dislike. Malfoy, whose pale eyes were still watering with pain and humiliation, looked malevolently up at Moody and muttered something in which the words, my father, were distinguishable. Oh, yeah, said Moody quietly, limping forward a few steps, the dull clunk of his wooden leg echoing around the hall. Well, I know your father of old, boy. You tell him Moody's keeping a close eye on his son. You tell him that from me. Now, your head of house will be Snape, won't it? Yes, said Malfoy resentfully. Another old friend, growled Moody. I've been looking forward to a chat with old Snape. Come on, you. And he seized Malfoy's upper arm and marched him off toward the dungeons. Professor McGonagall stared anxiously after them for a few moments, then waved her wand at her fallen books, causing them to soar up into the air and back into her arms. Don't talk to me, said Ron quietly to Harry and Hermione as they sat down at the Gryffindor table a few minutes later, surrounded by excited talk on all sides about what had just happened. Why not? Said Hermione in surprise. Because I want to fix that in my memory forever, said Ron, his eyes closed and an uplifted expression on his face. Draco Malfoy, the amazing bouncing ferret. Oh! Harry and Hermione both laughed, and Hermione began doling out beef casserole onto each of their plates. He could have really hurt Malfoy, though, she said. It was good, really, that Professor McGonagall stopped it. Hermione, said Ron furiously, his eyes snapping open again. You're ruining the best moment of my life. Things started to go downhill from breakfast in the great hall. The 4 long house tables were laden with tureens of porridge, plates of kippers, mountains of toast, and dishes of eggs and bacon. Harry and Ron sat down at the Gryffindor table next to Hermione. Neville Longbottom greeted them cheerfully. Neville was a round-faced and accident-prone boy with the worst memory of anyone Harry had ever met. Mail's due any minute. Harry had only just started his porridge when, sure enough, there was a rushing sound overhead, and 100 or so owls streamed in, circling the hall and dropping letters and packages into the chattering crowd. A big, lumpy package bounced off Neville's head, and a second later something large and grey fell into Hermione's jug, spraying them all with milk and feathers. "Errol!" said Ron, pulling the bedraggled owl out by the feet. Errol slumped unconscious onto the table, his legs in the air and a damp red envelope in his beak. "Oh, no," said Ron. "No, he's all right. He's still alive," said Hermione, prodding Errol gently with the tip of her finger. It's not that. It's that." Ron was pointing at the red envelope. It looked quite ordinary to Harry, but Ron and Neville were both looking at it as though they expected it to explode. What's the matter?" said Harry. She sent me a howler," said Ron faintly. "You'd better open it, Ron," said Neville in a timid whisper. "It'll be worse if you don't. My gran sent me one once and I ignored it, and it was horrible." Harry looked from their petrified faces to the red envelope. "What's a howler?" he said, but Ron's whole attention was fixed on the letter, which had begun to smoke at the corners. "Open it," Neville said. "It'll be all over in a few minutes." Ron stretched out a shaking hand, eased the envelope from Errol's beak, and slit it open. Neville stuffed his fingers in his ears. A split second later, Harry knew why. He thought a moment it had exploded, a roar, the sound of a huge hall shaking down the ceiling. "Stealing a car!" "I wouldn't have been surprised if they'd have expelled you. You wait till I get hold of you. I don't suppose you stopped to think what your father and I went through when it was gone." Mrs. Weasley's yells, 100 times louder than this, made the plates and spoons rattle on the table and echo deafeningly off the stone walls. People throughout the hall were swivelling around to see who had received the howler, and Ron sank so low in his chair that only his crimson forehead could be seen. "Letter from Dumbledore last night! I thought your father would die of shame. We didn't bring you up to be like this. You and Harry could have both died." Harry had been wondering when his name was going to crop up. He tried very hard to look as though he couldn't hear the voice that was making his eardrums throb. "Absolutely disgusted! Your father's facing an inquiry at work. It's entirely your fault. And if you put another toe out of line, we'll bring you straight back home." A ringing silence fell. The red envelope, which had dropped from Ron's hand, burst into flames and curled into ashes. Harry and Ron sat stunned, as though a tidal wave had just passed over them. A few people laughed, and gradually a babble of talk broke out again. I'm going to cut this scene down because there's one character I would like you to meet. This is the Death Day party. Do you remember that? Sir Nicholas de Mimsy Porpington died 31st of October 1942. Harry watched amazed as a portly ghost approached the table, crouched low and walked through it, his mouth held wide so that it passed through one of the stinking salmon. "Can you taste it if you walk through it?" Harry asked the ghost. Almost," said the ghost sadly, and he drifted away. "I expect they let it rot to give it a stronger flavour," said Hermione knowledgeably, pinching her nose and leaning closer to look at the putrid haggis. "Can we move on? I feel sick," said Ron. They had barely turned around, however, when a little man swooped down from under the table and came to a halt in midair before them. "Hello, Peeves," said Harry cautiously. Now, unlike the ghosts around them, Peeves, the poltergeist, was the very reverse of pale and transparent. He was wearing a bright orange party hat, a revolving bow tie, and a broad grin on his wide, wicked face. "Nibbles?" he said sweetly, offering them a bowl of peanuts covered in fungus. "No, thanks," said Hermione. "Heard you talking about poor Myrtle," said Peeves, his eyes dancing. "Rude you was about poor Myrtle." He took a deep breath and bellowed, "Oi, Myrtle!" "Oh, no, Peeves, don't tell her what I said. She'll be really upset." Hermione whispered frantically. I didn't mean it. I don't mind her. Oh, hello. Hello, Myrtle. The squat ghost of a girl had glided over. She had the glummest face Harry had ever seen, half hidden behind lank hair and thick pearly spectacles. What? She said sulkily. How are you, Myrtle? Said Hermione in a falsely bright voice. It's nice to see you out of the toilet. Myrtle sniffed. Miss Granger was talking about you, said Peeves slyly in Myrtle's ear. No, I was just saying how nice you look tonight, said Hermione, glaring at Peeves. Myrtle eyed Hermione